One of the major assertions that is made by the dispensational futurists in their false eschatological system is the idea that the church never existed before the New Testament. The church never existed in the Old Testament. So let's listen to this section here, First Redeemer Church, and let's listen to what the pastor has to say here.
This is the series of events where Jesus Christ, the Son of God, came to earth. He was born of a virgin, lived a sinless life, died on a cross, 3 days after that rose from the dead, and then shortly after that ascended back to heaven to the right hand of the Father. Christ's first coming, that took place about 2,000 years ago.
Indeed, the death, burial, resurrection, and ascension. Yes.
Shortly after the events surrounding Christ's first coming, we entered what is known as the church age. The church age. We've been in the church age now for about 2,000 years. The church age began after Jesus ascended back to heaven. Another way to say that is you won't find the church anywhere in the Old Testament. You know why? Because it didn't exist.
Okay, hear that? You won't find the church anywhere in the Old Testament. You know why? Because it didn't exist. See? The church didn't exist before the first coming of Christ. This is utterly fallacious. Absolutely fallacious. Let's look to a few different texts here. Let's go, first of all the way down to Acts chapter 7. So we're going to go 1 Thessalonians 4. Yep, that's the second advent, plus the resurrection of the dead in Christ, and the rapture. All happen at the same time in 1 Thessalonians 4, 13 through 18. We're going to go back to Revelation chapter 12, the woman in Revelation. There's only one woman in Revelation chapter 12. There's only one woman. Right here, this woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant, was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. This is the church of the Old Testament right here, the woman. This is Israel of the Old Testament, also known as the church in the Old Testament. You know why I say the church? Because this woman down here in verse 6, who flees into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 literal years, which did not begin until after the fall of the Roman Empire. This woman in verse 6 is the New Testament church. But notice in the prophecy, it's the same woman up here. This is Israel, the church of the Old Testament, who brings forth the Messiah, the male child. But once her child is raptured up to God and to his throne, the word is harpazo, and it means raptured, caught up to God and to his throne. Same word that is used in 1 Thessalonians 4 to talk about at the second advent, the resurrection of the saints and the rapture of them up to God, up to heaven, is the same word that is used here. So Jesus was caught up to God and to his throne. That's his ascension into heaven. But the woman fled into the wilderness for 1,260 literal years. Day equals year principle, which did not begin until after the fall of the Roman Empire. Same woman, Israel, the church, verse 1. Same woman, verse 6, Israel, the church. Same woman, not a different woman. But let's go down to Acts chapter 7. That's after Daniel 7. Let's see. Acts chapter 7. Stephen's speech. Very long chapter. This is very important because Stephen's speech is the end of that 70th week of Daniel 9, 24 through 27. Jesus himself fulfilled the first 3.5 years with his earthly ministry until his crucifixion, death, burial, resurrection, and ascension. And then for the next 3.5 years of that 70th week, the gospel goes out primarily to the Jews because Daniel's prophecy said 70 weeks are decreed about your people, Daniel, the Jews specifically. And then shortly after the stoning of Stephen, the gospel will go out to the Gentile world after the conversion of the Apostle Paul. But here is Stephen's speech. Here's what he says right here. You can read through the whole thing. He's going through church history. This is Stephen speaking about church history right here. He was the first church historian. How about that? Even before Luke, Stephen was the first church historian. And look what he concludes in his church history. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia before he lived in Haran, and said to him, go out from your land and from your kindred and go into the land that I will show you. And he did go out from the land of the Chaldeans and lived in Haran. He was a straight up pagan. Abram was a pagan. And after his father died, God removed him from there into this land which you are now living. Yet he gave him no inheritance in it, not even a foot's length, but promised to give it to him as a possession and to his offspring after him. And of course, the Apostle Paul in Galatians chapter 3 will talk about, if you be Christ's, then you are Abraham's offspring and heirs according to the promise. But let's go all the way down to verse 38. Watch this. Verse 38. Watch this. And Moses, whom they rejected, saying, who made you a ruler and a judge? This man God sent as both ruler and redeemer by the hand of the angel who appeared to him in the bush, etc. Notice, this Moses who said to the Israelites, God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your brothers. This is the one who was in the congregation in the wilderness. That word congregation, let's look it up. What does congregation mean in Acts chapter 7? Acts chapter 7, verse 38. Let's go to the Greek and make sure we understand this word properly, what congregation means. And when we do, let's see. Hutas, estenha, genomenos, and my Greek is terrible. Ekklesia, right there. Congregation, ekklesia. What does that mean? It means church. Assembly, congregation, church, the whole body of Christian believers. It means church. In Acts chapter 7, right there, verse 38. This is the one who is in the church in the wilderness with the angel who spoke to him at Mount Sinai. Did the church exist then in the Old Testament? Do we find the church in the Old Testament?
In fact, while the church age began after Jesus ascended back to heaven. Another way to say that is you won't find the church anywhere in the Old Testament. You know why? Because it didn't exist.
Well, it did exist. It did exist. And again, Revelation chapter 12, again, we went through the woman already. The woman clothed with the sun. By the way, the papists say that the woman of Revelation chapter 12, clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. The papists assert that this is Mary. And here it says right here, she was pregnant and was crying out. Of course it was Mary, right? The dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it, right? So Herod sent his men out to slay all the infants at the time after Jesus was born. And so that happened, right? But the woman must be Mary, right? Well, no, that's a literalistic reading of the text. This is symbolic. First of all, it says a great sign appeared in heaven, not on the earth. It's a heavenly sign, heavenly symbolic language to describe what's going to happen on the earth, or what did happen on the earth at this point, the time when John is writing this. She was pregnant. This is Israel. Was Mary clothed with the literal? If this is a literal woman, like Mary was a literal woman, was Mary literally clothed with the sun? Did she literally stand on the literal moon with her literal feet, and on her literal head a crown of literally 12 stars? Of course not. This is not literal. This is symbolic language. It even says right here, a great sign. The woman is symbolic of Israel, also known as the church of the Old Testament. Now go to Genesis chapter 37, verses 9 through 11, and I'll put my notes up here. Genesis 37, 9 through 11. This is Joseph's second dream in Genesis 37. The woman here represents all the sons of Israel, or Jacob, in totality. So that is what the woman represents in Revelation chapter 12. But notice, once the male child ascends up to God into his throne, the woman flees into the wilderness for 1,260 days, or 1,260 literal years, utilizing the day equals year principle, as is so often done in the prophetic texts of Scripture, especially the books of Daniel and Revelation. day equals year, principle which did not begin until after the fall of the Roman Empire. This woman is the New Covenant or New Testament church, but it's the same woman as back here, not different women. This woman in verse 6 this is not the Jews. This is not the Jews. And this time period, 1260 days, years, did not begin until after the fall of the Roman Empire. How do we know that? Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7 tells us that. 4 great beasts Daniel sees coming up out of the sea. These beasts represent empires. The Babylonian Empire, followed by the Medo-Persian Empire, followed by the Grecian Empire. That's the third one. The 4th beast represents the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire goes on until 476 AD, some 446 years after the crucifixion, death, burial, resurrection, and ascension of Christ. The Roman Empire, and then it has 10 horns on it. So after its fall, you have to look to the 10 horns. These are the 10 lesser tribal nations, the 10 lesser vassal nations that made up the suzerain empire of the Roman Empire. And then 3 of these 10 would be plucked up by the roots before this little horn, a little horn could arise to power, and then it had a mouth speaking great things. Okay, then we have a heavenly interlude here, verses 9 and 10. Verses 11 through 12, again, we're back down to looking at things on the earth, the great words that the horn was speaking. Okay, then another heavenly interlude here, verses 13 and 14. Verse 15, back to the earth, because Daniel is anxious. He has anxiety, and the visions of his head alarmed him. And I approached one of those who stood there and asked him the truth. So despite the fact that he had anxiety and that his spirit was alarmed within him, he wanted to know the truth concerning all this. I desired to know the truth about the 4th beast and about the 10 horns, verse 20, on its head, and the other horn that came up, before which 3 of them fell. This little horn, this Antichrist, had a mouth speaking great things, and this horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them. Right? What do the papists always say? Hey, Christ said he would set up his kingdom and his church, and the gates of hell will never prevail against it. Well, wait a minute. Right here, this little horn actually does prevail over the saints. In what way? In what way? By a mouth speaking great things. That is, great false doctrines. Great false doctrines that the papacy would teach after the fall of the Roman Empire. It would gradually bring in all kinds of falsehoods, errors, and lies, as Jonathan Edwards eloquently pointed out in his History of the Work of Redemption in Volume 1 of the works of Jonathan Edwards. So this little horn makes war with the saints and prevails over them, but notice down in verse 25, they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time, 1260 years after, and this 1260 years began after the fall of the Roman Empire. Okay, so to lay this out, I've done this before. Let's go all the way up. What rough beasts and the Antichrist? You got the futurist, dispensational futurist, looking for a future Mr. Diabolical, single solitary individual called Antichrist. That's false. The Bible teaches the Antichrist is a system, a corporate religio-political entity, as Charles Hodge would put it. Then you got the preterist saying, oh, don't worry about it. Antichrist was in the distant past. We don't need to worry about that anymore. Both of these are false. Both of these are false views. Preterism and futurism are false. Historicism is what the Bible teaches. 4 beasts, Babylonian, Medo-Persian, followed by the Medo-Persian, followed by the Grecian Empire, followed by the Roman Empire. The 10 horns that sprung up out of the Roman Empire, or that existed when the Roman Empire collapsed in 476 AD. The Ostrogoths, Burgundians, Vandals, Heruli, Visigoths, Suevi, Alemanni, Franks, Saxons, and Lombards. Noted 18th century Reformed Baptist theologian, scholar, biblical exegete, and historicist, as opposed to preterism and futurism, Dr. John Gill, lived in the 18th century over in England. And he, notice this, he goes to his rest and dies about 5 years before the American colonies would declare their independence. But he writes in his commentary on Daniel 7:24 concerning the 10 horns, he says, these are 10 kingdoms which sprung out of the Roman Empire, or into which it was broken and divided upon the dissolution of it about AD 476. He gives Mede's list here, very similar to my own. He gives Sir Isaac Newton's list, very similar to my own. He includes the Huns. I don't include the Huns because they weren't a kingdom people, but a nomadic people. But I can see why somebody would include the Huns. All this is to simply say that this is how we are to read and interpret Daniel chapter 7 and the 10 horns after the fall of the Roman Empire, and then this little horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them. This little horn is the Antichrist. Before this horn could rise to power, 3 of the 10 would have to be removed first. Who are those 3? The Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths. 493 AD for the Heruli, 534 AD for the Vandals, 538 AD for the Ostrogoths out of Rome, kicking them out of Rome. The basic outline of these 3, I do go through an outline here so you guys can pause it and check out why I give the dates that I do, historically speaking. But then this, only in 538 AD could this 1260 years begin. And if all you have to do is add 1260 years to 538 AD, and when you do, a Code of Justinian could only be in force in 538 AD after the Ostrogothic kingdom was kicked out of with the defeat of the Ostrogoths. Only then could the royal edict take any effect. Code of Justinian making the Bishop of Rome the head of all the holy churches and also the head of all the holy priests of God. So add 1260 years to 538 AD, and what happens when you do? Let's do this. Watch this. Napoleon and the Catholic Church. Watch this. This is how you know the papacy is the Antichrist. One of the ways. Bible prophecy. Pope Pius VI. Okay, so while in 1796, French troops under the command of General Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Italy, defeated the papal army and occupied Ancona and Loreto. Now, after a little bit of back and forth, General Louis Alexandre Berthier, who was working for Napoleon, marched to Rome, entered it unopposed, 1798. That's 1260 years from 538 AD. And proclaiming a Roman Republic, demanded the Pope renounce his temporal power. So when we get to Revelation chapter 13, and we see a beast rising up out of the sea, this is the same entity as the little horn of Daniel chapter 7, because notice in verse 5, it says it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. 42 months. That's a time, times, and half a time. That's 1260 days. It's all talking about the same time period. Day equals year principle, 1260 literal years. The beast rises up out of the sea. Remember what a beast is. It's not a single solitary individual human being. A beast is an empire. An empire, a corporate body, a corporate entity. Again, as Charles Hodge says in his Systematic Theology, Volume 3. He's got a section on Antichrist. And it seemed to have a mortal wound, right? Seemed to have a mortal wound. But its mortal wound was healed. So it receives a mortal wound at the end of these 42 months. Right? Those who worship like the beast says to worship are worshiping the dragon, are worshiping Satan. He had given his authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast. Had a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, just like the little horn in Daniel chapter 7, because it's the same entity. Blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is those who dwell in heaven. It was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. Again, Daniel chapter 7 says the same thing. Authority was given it over every tribe, a people, language, and nation. All who dwell on the earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written in before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. He is to be taken captive. To captivity he goes. Anyone is to be slain with the sword he must be slain. So Pope Pius VI was taken into captivity by the use of military power. That's what the sword means in Bible prophecy. It's by military power. Okay? So that is the Antichrist. But these people are looking for a future Mr. Diabolical, Nikolai Carpathia, or Damien from the movie Omen or some such thing. But no, the church definitely existed in the Old Testament, right? There is one people of God, one. There always has been. Abraham was a Christian before Christ's first coming. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, all these were Christians before the first advent of Christ. Okay? They are our Christian brethren. That's who they are. So yeah, the church did exist before that. But that's just an issue of dispensational futurism that really bothers me. It's right there in Acts chapter 7, verse 38. You know, this is the same one who was in the wilderness, in the congregation, in the wilderness wandering. That is the church. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. Talk to you soon. Soli Deo Gloria.